Okay, good evening. Just waiting as a few more people enter, waiting for it to settle down a moment. I'm beginning to recognise some names and some faces. That's nice. So I just saying I had difficulty turning away myself away from the tennis, but I'm here, so I'm glad you are as well. Okay, seems to have settled down a little bit now. So this is lesson 6 out of 7. And we will begin as we have done on previous weeks. And I hope you've all appreciated this little beginning, and the homeworks you've been getting have all been leading up to next week's lesson on meditation. So there is a method in what I'm doing. So can we bring ourselves here now into this new activity? So let's cultivate awareness of the body. And as usual, feel the weight of your bottom on the seat. The sensation of the feet on the floor, the pressure of the feet on the floor. Cultivate awareness of the clothing where it's touching your skin. Take a few deep breaths. Find that sensation of the breathing, raising the abdomen, the chest lifting. Remember, those sensations have always been there, but they've not been in conscious awareness. There has been, they're there in consciousness, but that you haven't directed the attention to them, and now we have. So you've got sound, i.e. me speaking. You've got sights if your eyes are open. And you'll have the inner world as well. How aware are you of the mood that you're in? Whether you're feeling a bit harassed, a bit stressed, or very relaxed. If you're feeling a bit like you've been rushing around, give that body awareness even more attention, a few more minutes. Okay, so I'm going to share the screen now as usual. Okay, so last week, I hope we've all got the routine of now sitting for a minimum of 15 minutes. We've graduated from being perhaps slumped in a chair to sitting more upright. And some of you may have extended to more than 15 minutes, maybe 20 minutes. You may well be someone who meditates regularly, in which case 20 minutes is not a problem. The important thing is we do not sit for a point that we get very restless. It's not meant to be uncomfortable. Well, a certain amount of discomfort as we progress, but that's not its immediate aim. The other homework I gave you was to make yourself a blank wheel of life and to find a little bit more description of the realms, so the 6 realms of the wheel of life. This is very easy to find. And I did give you an example of myself going through those states of mind, those realms on a day out. We can wake up in one of them. We can be in one of them for a very long time. If we're having a difficult time, we might be in the hell realm for quite a period of time. But we do move between them. So I asked you to see if you could just cultivate some awareness of that. We'll come back to that because it very much follows on from what we are doing this evening. So we'll be looking at the wheel of life, or hopefully the wheel of life will come into your pondering as we progress. So we are this week, lesson 6, looking at the Paramitas. And before we do that, reminding ourselves that wheel of life that you've hopefully experimented with over the week is a psychological map. We said this last week. It's very subjective, and it's holding up a mirror to ourselves. But the realms that you might visit will be different from the ones that I am in. We can tell sometimes when somebody is in the fighting demon or even the hungry ghost. If you noticed yourself when you looked at this over the week, how did you know where you were, what your state of mind was? Did you notice you might have felt that you were bouncing between two of them and you weren't quite sure, but you knew it was, say, on the right-hand side or at the top or at the bottom? These ones at the bottom are the more difficult realms for us. And occasionally you will have gone, I hope, into the human realm. You may not have been aware of that, because if you're feeling generally well and you're not physically fit and feeling okay, the human realm is where we are, all the virtues that a human can have. And we often actually don't really appreciate when we are being kind and compassionate. That's not always something that occurs to us. We're more familiar with when we're feeling angry or upset about something. So if you remember, samsara is the world of going around and around in those realms. And the training is to help us to come out of samsara where there is more equanimity for us, more balanced. But the world isn't all bad. It contains some, pleasant and joyful times. The heavenly realm does. The only thing wrong, in a sense, with the heavenly realm is it can make us a bit selfish and a bit proud and not concerned about others, but otherwise it can be quite a nice place to be. And of course it's impermanent. That's this other disadvantage. If you remember the outside rim, not going to say too much about this, but suffice just to say that the outside rim is reminding us that about the laws of karma, about the fact that for every action, a volitional action, an I-based action, there are consequences. And it's difficult to work with, I think, the outer realm on a day-to-day, like we can work with that middle one. I once read it described as falling down a very tall tree very quickly, and someone asked you to count the branches as you fell. And obviously you couldn't. However, retrospectively, it's nice to work with when you can look at a situation and go back to looking at how it arose. Okay. And the middle. Remembering in the middle, this is all very much connected to this evening. I'm not just repeating it. It's all hopefully going to join up for you in some way. And in the middle, we have the three animals, the cockerel, the snake, and the wild pig. And those are the root poisons. All the other emotions come from those three. And they are fired up from this sense of me, a separate me that has to protect itself and keep itself safe, not necessarily physically safe, but psychologically safe. And by the side of it, I've just copied something from week 2 or 3, I can't remember which week it was, when we were looking at the 3 pillars of Buddhism from the Eightfold Path, where we have wisdom, prajna, sila, that's the ethical conduct, and mental development. And the reason I've put them side by side is because if we look at the bit in blue, and that's what we are working with on the Noble Eightfold Path, it all looks very rational and logical. And I think we tend to think that the Buddhist training is very much concerned with this rational sphere. We think of ourselves as rational. But actually, Buddhism points out something that might surprise us. We're not. And it's bringing us a training, it's bringing us into contact with our emotions and our emotional patterns. And that can be quite difficult on occasions for us. And we might find things that we don't like or we didn't know. So we need quite a bit of courage when we get deeper into this practice, because these emotional energies, we tend to either push them away, distract ourselves with doing something else, or dissociate ourselves from them and don't actually recognize them. But they're very powerful. Energy is often the one that is used as examples because, anger is one used often as an example. That's because I think we're all familiar with anger. And it can be quite destructive, and it's very, very powerful. And a lot of what drives us is unconscious. And as I've said, the training is about getting to know ourselves a little bit better and to transform this psychic energy. And the paramitas that we're looking at this evening are a practice that help us to do this. And just another reminder that if I whiz through these slides, they are available. Apparently, I've just been told this week's will be a bit delayed, but they are available for you to look, if you're registered, to look at again. So if I whiz past them, then and you feel like you wanted to write them down or whatever, you don't need to. Plus, all these things are quite readily available on different websites. And we recommended some books as well at the beginning. So the paramitas, we have generosity, moral discipline, patience, energy, meditation, and wisdom. I've also put the Sanskrit words there. Actually, I haven't been that consistent between the Sanskrit and the Pali. And there's other definitions as well, because they're often translated in different ways. That's why I've used the more formal words for them. But they are something that we do. They are a practice. And they are more of a practice used by Mahayana Buddhism, or the northern schools of Buddhism. So before we look more deeply into them, into more detail, I wanted us to just take a bit of a detour and have a look at what Mahayana Buddhism is, what's meant by that, or the northern schools. So if you recall, the Buddha was born in India, northern India, which now modern day Nepal. And so far we have been looking at the Buddha's first teachings. They are known as the first turning of the wheel, and they are also known as the teaching of the elders, or they are the Theravadan teachings. And Buddhism is nearly 3,000 years old, and it's travelled further south. And in fact, it disappeared more or less from India, and it settled in Sri Lanka. And then we've got Mahayana down here. These are the southern traditions in yellow, and that is where you will get Theravada as the main practice. If you recall, in the first week, we talked about the main schools of Buddhism, not the only schools, but the main schools of Buddhism are Theravada, Zen, and Tibetan. So we have the northern schools. So Buddhism has gone into Tibet, into China, Korea, Japan, and now it's traveled to the West. It's very, very young here in the West. But as it has traveled, there have been adaptations and developments from those very first early teachings. It is essential that if you're going to train in Buddhism, study Buddhism, that you do need to know those early teachings. You need to have a good grounding in those early teachings, hence why we're doing this course. And some of you quite rightly have returned from having done it before. And whilst I've been studying Buddhism for a long time, it's been a while since I've looked at some of these early teachings, and preparing for this has been very, very helpful for me to remind myself. Because if we're not really that conversant with these early teachings, then some of the later developments that have become Mahayana Buddhism either don't make any sense to us, or we misinterpret them, which is not good. So we're going to look at some differences between Mahayana Buddhism in the northern traditions and Theravada in the southern traditions. And they have a lot in common. As I've just said, they've got the basic teachings in common. And Mahayana is focused on the fact that each of us, we're very different. We've all got a different background, different karmic influences. We've got different personalities. There are differences because of culture, because of race, because of gender. And for each and every one of us, we have to rediscover and make Buddhism meaningful to us. What is helpful for me might not be helpful for you. And this is why there are so many teachings. And over time, I will change, and different teachings that I've not found helpful now might be helpful to me in the future. So Mahayana looked at developing Buddhism and looked at new ways of presenting those teachings. One of them, for example, is Indra's net, which is a metaphor from Mahayana Buddhism. And if we go back and remember the 3 signs of being, that is impermanence, that nothing, absolutely nothing, as an independent, solid, permanent self nature. And so everything's in a state of flux. And then the 3rd sign was that is dukkha for us. And Indra's net is trying to show the independence and interconnectedness of everything. The idea that every action has a butterfly effect on everything else, which again links to that outer rim of the wheel of life, doesn't it? That there was causes and effects became the cause, and they're all looping into one another. And in Indra's net, each of the eye of the net, so we're all, this is a spider's web obviously, but they all interlink, is a single perfect jewel, and each other jewel is reflected in the jewels. All the jewels reflect each other forever. It's infinite. And this is a metaphor to try and explain to us the interconnectivity, the interpenetration of all things, that everything affects something else. And this comes to a Mahayana concept called shunyata, which has been translated as emptiness. And again, this goes back to the 3 signs of being that have been further developed. And emptiness may not be the best translation, but it's better than previous ones, such as the void, giving the sense that there's nothing there. It's not saying that. Shunyata is trying to show us, again, that nothing is independent. Everything is connected and having an effect on something else. And an Indian Buddhist philosopher, very famous one, 1st or 2nd century, Nagarjuna, has done a lot with this, and he said, neither is nor is not, neither both is and is not, nor neither is or is not. And you might think, what on earth is he talking about? It's worth having a look at that and thinking about it on a very simple level. I'm sat with my laptop on a table. I call this in front of me a table. And it's bits of wood stuck together. It's got a flat top and it's got 4 legs. So it's bits of wood. So it's a table. It's not a table. So it neither is nor it is not. It's emptiness or shunyata that helps us to appreciate that we label things as one thing. And we tend to think in opposites. So it's light, it's dark, it's day, it's night. But actually, all these things are not separate. And sometimes, perhaps, when something has disturbed you, upset you, somebody's annoyed you, and we can be very quick to label it all as they did this and the situation is that. And it's things like this, just a little bit of reflection, that help us to appreciate that actually we don't know the whole story of something. What are the connections? What are the causes? What other effects are in play there? So hopefully these things are here to help us. They're not just meant to be philosophical conundrums that just confuse us, but they can be taken on different levels. And it can be very simple or it can be very profound. The other important difference between Mahayana Buddhism and Theravadan. So Mahayana, to repeat, to us, we're generally talking there about Zen Buddhism and Tibetan Buddhism as Mahayana Buddhism, as the northern schools. There are others, but they are the main ones and the main ones that we could come in contact with. And one of the biggest emphasis in Mahayana is this idea of a bodhisattva. So on the left, I have a picture of an arhat or arahat, and that is an enlightened being. It's a term used in Theravadan Buddhism. So the Buddha was arhat or arahat. So if they are enlightened and they can see the true nature of everything, they're free from samsara, they're free from all the mental turmoil and defilements. A bodhisattva is also an enlightened being, but the bodhisattva ideal is somebody who is not interested in enlightenment only for themselves, but they have an aspiration to help everybody. They want to gain enlightenment for the benefit of humankind, for everybody else. Now, actually, I think we're splitting hairs a bit here, because if you were enlightened as a Theravada and you were Arhat, you would have that wisdom and compassion. You would also, like the Buddha, be very concerned about other living beings. But the concept of a bodhisattva is something that has developed in Mahayana Buddhism, and a lot of emphasis has been put on the bodhisattva path. So bodhicitta is two words, bodhi, which is the beginning of bodhisattva there, you can see, and that means awake, like the Buddha. And chitta, which is a word often translated as mind. But going back to what I said earlier about we think that we're very rational and logical, and the word mind, that's been the translation, that also has that connotation for us. So increasingly, we talk about the heart mind or mind heart, because that is reminding us about the emotional side. So with that in mind, I want to tell you a Mahayana parable of the jewel in the robe, and a reminder that these stories, these parables, are teaching stories. They're meant to give you some insight into yourself. Anyway, in this parable, a poor man visits a rich friend, and they have a good drinking session, have a good evening, and the poor man gets rather drunk and passes out in a drunken stupor. And whilst he's in that state, his friend, the rich man, sews into the hem of his coat a jewel, very expensive, precious jewel. And the poor man, out for the count, is unaware of this. And when he wakes in the morning, he is in his friend's house, but his friend isn't there, and he leaves. And he is traveling around looking for work, going from place to place. And all the time he's unaware that he has sewn into the hem of his coat a precious jewel. And things don't go very well for him. He really does end up homeless, in a very poor, really, really struggling. And this goes on for quite a long time. Anyway, a few years later, by chance, the wealthy man and the friend come across one another in the street. And the wealthy friend was really shocked to see the poor man's condition. And he said, well, why have you allowed yourself to become so poor? Why didn't you use the jewel that I sold into the hem of your coat? You could have sold it and lived off the proceedings. You could have had anything that you wanted. But of course, he didn't know that the jewel was in the hem of his coat. He'd been too drunk to realize that. So the gem represents in us that seed or that Buddha nature. The Buddha was a man. He was not a god. And in his heart, he had the ability to develop wisdom and compassion. He did that through his own efforts. And the Buddha said, we have the same ability, but we just don't realize it. And we have difficult times without realizing that within we have that potential for the wisdom and the compassion, but it's covered up with this I and I likes and my opinions and things that I don't like, and all those, as it's said, sticky attachments. You may recall in the first lesson, I showed you this where the Buddha, awakening on enlightenment, said, how wonderful, how miraculous, all beings, but all beings are fully endowed with the wisdom and the power of the Tathagata, but sadly human beings, due to sticky attachments, are not aware of it. And that's the parable is pointing to this. And it's important that we develop that confidence that actually we have more wisdom and more strength to deal with difficult circumstances for ourselves or for others, or just generally to be more at peace or contented with life than we generally are. And that confidence is something that comes with the practice as the practice proceeds. So in Mahayana Buddhism, you'll be more familiar with this probably if you've come across Tibetan Buddhism. We get a lot of imagery. This is Avalokiteshvara, the Bodhisattva of Compassion, and we have others. We have Manjushri, for example, the Bodhisattva of Wisdom. And are they real people? Well, they're aspirational, and Avalokiteshvara isn't. They're archetypes, aren't they? But do bodhisattvas exist? I think so. I think sometimes we have people who are genuinely able to help other people. Think of Mother Teresa, for example. There are many. And the other thing about Mahayana, it put greater emphasis on lay people. Theravadan had got to a little bit, perhaps lots of book knowledge. It had got a little bit too dry, perhaps. And the emphasis was very much on monastics, where Mahayana came back with saying anybody can take the training and gain from the training. So a bodhisattva takes a vow to remain in all the difficulties of samsara to help everybody else. So they're not concerned with just their own enlightenment. But anybody who was enlightened would be concerned about everybody else. The two would go together. And most Mahayana traditions will, in one way or another, the wording will differ. The wordings of these things do differ, but will chant in English or in a different language the Bodhisattva vows. So the Bodhisattva takes a vow, and people who practice with Mahayana traditions will also be used to chanting these. And it's sentient beings are numberless. I vow to assist them all. The afflicting passions are inexhaustible. I vow to transform them all. The Dharma teachings are manifold. I vow to learn them all. The Buddha way is supreme. I vow to go to the end. And you might think, gosh, couldn't possibly do any of that. But vows are there to inspire us, aren't they? But a Theravadan would also hold to something very similar. So the Paramitas, translated as perfection or gone beyond. So the word paramita means perfection or gone beyond. And gone beyond what? Well, I'll come to that in a moment. There are 10 of them, but it's usually only 6 that lay people are particularly concerned with. So we're just going to look at the 6. They are there in the Theravadan tradition as well, but the wording of them might be slightly different. And you can look at them and see that they are very much linked to the Noble Eightfold Path. I think I said to you that all the teachings from the Buddha come in one form or another from the Noble Eightfold Path. That was what the Buddha said was there to help us with dukkha. So they're all linked to the Noble Eightfold Path. So we have generosity or giving. We have moral discipline or restraint. Patience, patient endurance, energy, diligence, meditation, and wisdom. And hopefully, as we go through them, you will see that they interlink and support each other. The first one, our word donation comes from the word dana. And giving or generosity, giving what? Well, actually, anything that somebody else needs. Going beyond, I said, well, going beyond I and what I wants to do. Sometimes if people ask you for a favor, you may feel like a bit when they ask you and you don't want to do it. Going beyond I would be even if it was inconvenient to you, as long as it was something reasonable, using our common sense. But even if it was something reasonable, but was at the wrong time for you, or you just didn't want to do it. And you can feel that sometimes. Oh no, I got asked to do that again. But going beyond I is going beyond what I wants to do. And this is why it is a practice. So what are we perfecting? Well, we are perfecting those virtues in the Buddha nature that we were talking about. So dana is not given to feel good about myself. It's not true dana then. It's very much interested in the motivation for what you are doing. Traditionally, it is said that you give 3 things. It's the giving of material things. It's the giving of time included in that. It's the giving of Dharma. So those are the teachings of the Buddha. It's not asking you to teach anybody about Buddhism. It means to embody it. So by your behavior, by your speech, you give people the Dharma in that sense. And that would help people to have courage. And so you're giving them fearlessness. To give material things does need practice sometimes, doesn't it? And the Buddha said we need to practice. And there was a wealthy merchant in the Buddha's time who would go and listen to the Buddha's teachings. But he said himself to the Buddha, I can't give. I don't want to give. don't want to give any of my money away. And you're saying that it would be a good thing to do. And the Buddha said, oh, that's fair enough. And he suggested to him a practice. And he said, give something that you want to give away, or you don't want to give away. For example, money, take a gold coin, put it in one hand, and then just put it into the other hand and say, take that. And then do it back again with your left hand to your right hand and say, take that. And actually, it might be worth you just taking something that you wouldn't want to give away and just trying that. Because you can feel, even when you're not really giving it away, you're just passing it from one hand to the other. In your imagination, you're giving it away. And we can feel that resistance. And these things are often felt in the body. And this is one of the awarenesses that we are cultivating. The next one, we've come across this before, the Sila practice, the moral discipline, and obviously linked to the 5 precepts. Walpola Rahula, one of the books recommended at the beginning, said that ethical conduct is built on the conception of love and compassion for all beings. That's where the teachings are. It's also restraint. You might not like the word restraint, but here it means to find a little discipline of something that you have to work with. It could be something very minor, like closing doors quietly, showing a bit of consideration for the door. Or something that you may do normally when you're in a hurry or upset, or you're feeling greedy or you're anxious. Because when we are in those moods, then our behavior changes because of them. So it's a good practice to take something and just to work with it. I, for example, I'm not very good at after an evening meal, making sure that everything in the kitchen is all tidied away and tops wiped down, etc., etc. And in a way, that's not showing the respect for the things that I am using. So a little discipline that I do is stand there and make sure that I have done it properly. And I actually find it quite difficult, and I can feel the impulse is just to leave the kitchen and go and do whatever else I want to do. So we are having to think about taking something like that perhaps we could work with. The precepts in Chinese are often translated as the protections, because the 5 precepts, they protect us from our impulses, and they are there to support us and to protect other people as well. Patient endurance, Kasante, this is again to sit with impulses. And all these are helped by cultivating this presence in the body. So the essence of this paramita is that strength of mind that helps us to face difficulties without losing our composure. I'm sure we've all experienced acting in haste, doing something and regretted it afterwards, and wondered what on earth we were thinking of, why we did it. Well, patient endurance acts as a containment for those kind of things. The problem is that impulsiveness creeps up on us when we least expect it. So again, it's something that we are working with. But also another very important part of patient endurance is when somebody else has hurt us, said things about us, generally fallen out with us, then not reacting to that, not wanting to get revenge back. And I'm not sure culturally that's encouraged, is it? The next one, devoted energy. This is translate virya or vira is translate. Our word virile comes from this. So you can, the word virile gives the idea of a lot of strength. This is a lot of energy. And what is this energy? This is our life energy, isn't it? It's the energy of life itself that we use every time that we speak, we listen or respond to anything. Our thoughts are a form of energy. And the three passions are high in energy. And this is about transforming the passions of the energy of the passions into the more positive energy. So this isn't energy as in busy, 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 being a workaholic type of energy. It can actually mean sitting still as we transform the passions into a more positive, skillful energy. Meditation, of which we are going to have next week talking about. Meditation, we've been doing little bits. It's not just about sitting. It's a daily activity. We'll talk more about that next week. It's a few things, and one of them is cultivating samadhi. That is the ability to give yourself into what this moment is being done. Your awareness is what at this moment is being done. Often when we're doing a job we don't like, we're not with it at all. You know, we can do the ironing in front of the television or with the radio on or something. We split the consciousness, where meditation is asking us to be with what we are doing, to cultivate that discipline. To meditate, to practice even on days when you don't feel like doing it. Again, that goes with the patient endurance. And to deal with the emotional household. So these paramitas are linked together. And wisdom. Well, what is wisdom? Seeing into the true nature of things just doesn't mean on this profound, where I don't understand, I can't understand, but it means in just small areas as well. And Buddhism says that underneath this surface level of I, me, is a different consciousness that is there, that's sees the interconnectedness. So that goes back again to this idea of Buddha nature. And it points to something beyond I, beyond what I know or understand. Buddhism is asking us to develop a different way of perceiving the world and a different way of the habitual way of thinking and the habitual way that we behave. And that's the cultivation of the wisdom. So just to sum them up there with a little bit more information of what they are. So Dharma, going beyond I. And we got the morality and the patience. And just a reminder that we emphasize this in the first few lessons, these teachings are to help us through dukkha. So it's not morality in a kind of thou shalt not do. We've said this. It's for the benefit of ourselves and the benefit of others. And I just wanted very, very quickly just to give you a flavour of working with those fires. And this story is the anger-eating demon, and it is actually there in the Pali Canon, in the sutras. So if you wanted to look on Access to Insight, you'd find it. But this is a slightly more a different version than the one in the Pali Canon. And it tells the story of, it's taking place in Indra, Lord of the Gods, in his courtroom in heaven. And he's not there, he's away somewhere. And all the courtiers are stood around, all gossiping and talking with one another, milling about. And what they didn't notice was this little demon, because they weren't aware, they could come sneaking in and sits himself down on Indra's throne. But sure enough, one of the courtiers out the corner of his eye sees this little demon and nudges a neighbour and says, "Have you seen that on the Lord Indra's throne?" And because it was noticed, the demon grew a little bit bigger. And then all the courtiers start to gossip about it and say, what a nerve, look at that sitting there. And every time that it gets a comment, it gets bigger and bigger. And eventually, all of the courtiers are talking and the place is buzzing, talking about the audacity of this little demon that's getting bigger and bigger and bigger with all this attention. And it gets as big as Indra. And now the courtiers are quite frightened. But luckily, Indra, at that moment, comes in. And he immediately, with awareness, can see what's going on. And he goes straight up to the very large demon now on his throne. And he goes down on his knee and he says, "I, Indra, Lord of the Gods, do greet you." And with that, the demon shrunk in size. And he repeated it, "I, Indra, Lord of the Gods, I greet you." And he bows to this demon who shrinks again. And he does this for a third time until the demon is back to its little puny original size and sneaks off the throne. That story is there to remind us, when we are working with these fires, we don't turn our backs on them. We don't feed them. It's a gentle approach. And if you're comfortable with bowing in Buddhist groups, some bowing most Buddhist groups do bowing of one sort or another, because we're bowing to the wonder of it all and to the energy of these afflicting emotions. So if you are prone to anger, then that's a practice that you can use. And we're just going to finish now with Dhammapada verse 3. "He abused me, he beat me, he defeated me, he robbed me. In those who harbour such thoughts, hatred will never cease." When we're upset with somebody, we're angry with somebody, this is the kind of thing we say to ourselves, and we feed it, and the hatred gets bigger. And we know from just watching the news how that can end up with a lot of destructive behaviour, and a lot of damage can be done. So your homework this week, I'm going to work with the fires. So you're doing your usual sitting in your chair or on your cushion, trying to stay with the breath, but it's a relaxed approach. The other thing I'm going to suggest is, this was the school that I practice with, one of the senior teachers decided this, and it's very helpful. Fill a pocket with something like paper clips, a handful of them. And during the day, every time you feel that, oh no, I don't like that, or I don't want to do this, or somebody's annoyed you, swap a paper clip over from one side to the other. And at the end of it, have a look and see how many you've moved over. You might be surprised. Okay, thank you. We will leave that there and open for any comments or any questions.
Thank you so much, Olwen. As always, if you would like to ask a question, you can either send it in the chat or you can raise your virtual hand and I will unmute you. Thank you.
I've been asked a question, how does yoga fit in with Buddhist teachings? To be honest, I'm not that familiar with yoga itself. However, I do know that the purpose of breathing in yoga is not quite the same that we are looking for in a Buddhist meditation. And we can talk about that next week. But yoga is helpful in that it's very physical, isn't it? Body aware. I think cultivating that body awareness is very useful. And there are a lot of other practices that I'm not familiar with in yoga that would complement some of the Buddhist practice.
Thank you so much, Olwen. So I now have some questions in the chat. Well, we have somebody thanking you for this fascinating evening, first of all. And then we have a question asking, what class do you suggest we take after this course, especially for someone new to Buddhism, with this being the first course taken?
Well, that's part of next week's lesson, isn't it? So by next week, I will make sure that I am fully familiar with the next ones to go on. And I've got some other things of myself to say. But if that's okay, we'll leave that next week. If you're not going to come next week and you want an answer to that, then perhaps you could put it into the shared folder, and hopefully we can get back to you that way.
Thank you so much, Olwen. I've got other two questions here. So the first is asking, what is the difference between Tibetan and Zen Buddhism?
Well, they're both Mahayana Buddhism. The cultural differences between Tibet and Japan, as with Sri Lanka as well, they influence the practices, because Buddhism is very adaptable into whichever country. Because of the nature of what it is, it adapts itself and picks up some of the cultural accretions of those societies. So if you were involved in a Tibetan practice, they would use different tools. Can't really go into the details of them. It's quite complex. Plus, I don't know that much about Tibetan. I have had experience of all three of the main traditions, but not extensively. But there will be different tools that they use. The aims are the same. But because of cultural differences, I think, you could just Google Tibetan stuff and Japanese Zen stuff, and you can see it just in the images that you get, because Tibetan tends to be very colourful, isn't it? Where Zen has a different approach to it.
Thank you so much. Another question here that is asking, what should I do if at the end of the day lots of paper clips end up in the other pocket? Day after day, I remind myself to breathe but can't focus, and then we'll end up having to move another paper clip.
We are very compassionate and kind to ourselves. It is not a practice that is meant to be stressing you. It's just meant to cultivate awareness. And actually, if you did move lots of paper clips, it might indicate not that you were full of bad temper or whatever, just that you are very aware, which is a bonus. So it's meant to be just a gentle exercise, just to find out a little bit about yourself. Some days you might find you've moved a lot. The first time I did it, I was surprised how often I was irritated by somebody or something. But be kind to yourself.
Thank you so much. Okay, I don't seem to have any more questions in the chat for now. I don't know if you have any more, Olwen?
No,
one
I
just
haven't.
arrived.
Okay.
Do we have time for one more?
Yes.
Could you please mention the other 4 paramitas?
Skillful means is one of them. Knowledge is another, not knowledge as in book knowledge, but that you know the teachings and you understand the teachings. And off the top of my head, I can't remember the other 2, but I will recall them for next week. Or you could easily find them. I tend to just stick with it with the 6. I find that's enough.
Sorry, somebody's mentioning that they sent a question I haven't asked. My bad. I skipped it. Do we have time for it?
Okay.
Thank you. Do all schools of Buddhism believe in demons and gods, or some schools, or are they just a metaphor?
The metaphors, the images. Sometimes it's very helpful to personify emotions. And particularly in Tibetan Buddhism, you get a lot of beautiful imagery, don't you, of the demons and things. But they're there to help us. It becomes less personal sometimes if something is personified like that.
Thank you so much, Olwen.
Okay.
Okay.
Well, thank you to everybody, and hopefully I will see you for the 7th. We did say if it was needed, we could have an 8th where it was more of a discussion. But let's meet next week. Okay, thank you very much. Good night.